A Snake in the Grass, A Wolf at the Door by Black K Cat. Chapter 6. Moving forward feels like recovering, like convalescing from some soul-deep disease. It is slow, steady, though often it feels as though he is progressing in fits and starts, sliding backwards as much as he ever moves forwards. The first year is the hardest. Jiraiya looks at Tsunade with his whole heart in his eyes, as though she is a storm and a fury and the last ray of light in a world long turned to darkness. Tsunade is still mourning Dan, and likely always will be in some portion of her heart, but a regard such as Jiraiya's is a hard thing to ignore. It is as though the time spent without her has eased Jiraiya's more objectionable habits some, shown him what there is to lose if he fails to win her heart yet again, and it's clear that Tsunade appreciates the, if not cessation, then at least the lessening of Jiraiya's perverted habits. She looks at him and smiles and shakes her head. Jiraiya grins in answer, never quite managing to be sheepish, but laughing at himself just as much as Tsunade does. And even from the distance he so carefully maintains, Orochimaru can see that their hearts are closer than they've ever been before. Tsunade won't avoid Orochimaru, which means Jiraiya no longer can, and there is no way Orochimaru can give both of them the slip when they're determined about something. He allows himself to be drawn back, lets them think that all is forgiven and forgotten, though that is far from the actual truth. Orochimaru is good at holding grudges, nursing small bits of spite to fuel his hurt, and he clings to that feeling, to the memory of Jiraiya stepping past him without so much as a glance, because if he did otherwise, he'd slide right back into the hopeless, helpless sort of love he's always held for his teammates. But Jiraiya has never looked twice at a man, even one like Orochimaru, who can pass for a woman if he must, and it has always been a futile hope. Orochimaru has never fooled himself into thinking otherwise, even though he often wishes that he could. Whenever the pain weighs at him, though, there is a haven to be found, a port in the storm of these unwelcome emotions. Sakamoto is forever waiting, door unlocked and home welcoming, ready to lend his silent, or not so silent, support, even if Orochimaru can never bring himself to ask for it. There is a chair for him, a stack of texts on obscure jutsus lost during the clan wars, a cup of tea, and a broad brain grin to greet him the moment he steps in the door. Kakashi looks to him, never flinches away, welcomes Orochimaru, sneaks the same way he welcomes Orochimaru himself, and it's good. Unfamiliar, even after more than 2 years, but now Orochimaru is at a point where he couldn't imagine doing without it. It terrifies him sometimes, this new reliance, because he knows the risks, the price, the cost. He remembers watching Tsunade walk away from Kana, remembers Jiraiya's quiet, "I'll stay with the kids," and distant Ame, and remembers how he himself broke each time. Slightly, subtly, but the cracks ran deep, no matter how invisible they seemed. When Sakamoto decides to leave him, Orochimaru fears that there will no longer be even pieces of himself to patch together. All that he is will be so much dust upon the wind, and the death of the soul is something that, for all his knowledge, Orochimaru is unable to circumvent. The second year is easier, though Orochimaru is uncertain for the entirety of it whether his pain is easing or if he's simply become accustomed to it. Tsunade and Jiraiya are still circling each other, still testing the waters between them, but Orochimaru can look at them now without feeling that he should flinch. He can walk with them and feel only a faint urge to flee, and take missions with them and not be reduced to watching Jiraiya's back with hidden resentful longing, the way he always used to. It is good, even, to be an equal piece of a triad again, like a wobbling stool, finally settled on all legs once more. Even so, he keeps his distance, doesn't allow himself to be pulled under the tide of nostalgia. Being part of the legendary three inspires. Once already he has been burned, and Orochimaru thinks he is well within his rights to still shy away at the first hint of fire. In autumn, Sakamoto goes on a long mission to the south and returns tanned and grinning, full of stories he's all but bursting to share. He also brings back a small blue lacquered box, so smooth that the wood feels like the very best silk. And when Orochimaru meets him at the gates, a 4-year-old Kakashi at his side, Sakamoto immediately presses it into his hands. "I thought it was about time for a change, lovely," he says with a wink, and then scoops Kakashi up and whirls him around with a crow of greeting. Kakashi, who has long since traded the inquisitive cheer of his toddler years for a disgruntled poise, endures it with the long-suffering air of a prisoner accustomed to a complete loss of dignity, even though Orochimaru knows, will never say, that he spent his father's time away moping and wandering the quiet house morosely. Orochimaru watches them for a moment, feeling rather like his world is resettling around him, and then turns his attention to the box. It slides open easily to reveal a pair of earrings, silver and moonstone drops with an ivory fang dangling beneath each oval gem. They are delicate and lovely, slightly larger and heavier than the Tomo earrings he still wears, and the meaning couldn't be clearer if Sakamoto had actually draped him in wolf pelts and Hatake symbols. You're part of the Hatake clan. You're ours now, they say, and Orochimaru has not thought before how Sakamoto must feel watching Orochimaru divide his time between his old friends and his new. But this is a good indication that the man is not so selfless as he appears. It makes something in Orochimaru ease strangely to know that Sakamoto can be just as greedy and possessive as he is himself. Without comment, he slips off his Tomo earrings and tucks them into a pocket, replaces them with the moonstone earrings, and brushes his fingers over the sharp end of one wolf tooth. They are heavy, but it's a good weight. Reassuring to be able to feel the difference from the previous ones so clearly. When he looks up, Sakamoto and Kakashi are both watching him, their expressions amusingly identical. There's a touch of satisfaction, a tracery of smugness, an edge of jeer that is common in the father but unusual now in the son. And Orochimaru raises a brow at both of them, letting his hand fall away from the smooth tooth. They stare at him for another moment, then look at each other. Kakashi nods decisively. Sakamoto grins. There's an entire conversation to be had in their silent exchange. Were Orochimaru able to read it? They're perfect for you, lovely, Sakamoto says cheerfully, slinging Kakashi over one shoulder like a sack of rice. The boy yelps in protest, making his father grin even wider, and Orochimaru rolls his eyes at the other man's expression. He steps forward and rescues Kakashi, more to save himself from the sulking that will come of it than any attention paid to the boy's dignity, and lets him slide to the ground. As soon as he's steady, Kakashi sniffs, curls his fingers in Orochimaru's obi, and ignores his father in a truly spectacular fashion that Orochimaru finds unnervingly familiar. It's how he himself acts when Jiraiya aggravates him beyond measure, after all. Perhaps Kakashi has been spending too much time with him these past months. Sakamoto, as good-natured as ever, simply laughs, stepping up on Orochimaru's other side and slinging an arm around his shoulders. I think I've got more road dust than skin on me at the moment, he says cheerfully. Let's go home. I want a shower and then a meal that isn't rations. At this point, I'm desperate enough for a change of pace that I'd probably eat someone's hot sandal. And I'm sure you two could do without that kind of shame. Orochimaru carefully does not mention the pot of curry that is waiting on the stove. I believe we can spare a sandal, he says blandly, letting Sakamoto drag him in the direction of the house that has somehow become home. As long as you're willing to eat it where no one can see you, I have no objections. Agreed, Cub? From his father, Kakashi would protest the nickname. From Orochimaru, he allows it with only the faintest roll of his eyes. Why not? He agrees with equal blandness, hunkering down a little so the bottom half of his face is hidden by his scarf. It's becoming something of a habit lately, and Orochimaru makes a mental note to suggest a mask instead. There's less risk of an enemy stepping on the end and choking him that way. Sakamoto protests their studied indifference with a wounded sort of dismay, more exaggeration than actual offense taken, and is summarily ignored. 3 years after Tsunade's return, Kakashi enters the academy with the rest of those his age and graduates in the space of a year, at the very top of his class. He's a genius, people whisper, the best in his generation, and Orochimaru hears them and his expression goes tight. Sakamoto watches him, and Kakashi equally, sees the way his son looks to Orochimaru first and foremost, always gauges how to take things by measure of the Sannin's reaction, and it warms him down to the bone. Likely, Orochimaru should not be anyone's yardstick when it comes to social interactions, but he's better now with Tsunade at his back and Sagamo at his shoulder. The way he and the other Sannin have traded positions, the fact that even with his old teammates around, Orochimaru gravitates towards his new family first, brings a smile to Sakamo's face every time he thinks of it. Tsunade and Jiraiya are still an inescapable part of the present, as well as the past. But for all of that, Sagamo is the one Orochimaru now seeks out. He still trains with the other Sannin, still walks beside them on nights out, so that the other two won't have to call their outings dates. But far more of his time is spent with Sakamo and Kakashi, no matter what they happen to be doing. No matter how much easier Orochimaru finds it to walk through the village now, the expression he wears whenever someone whispers, "genius," is likely the reason Kakashi sneers at such words. He's a touchy, arrogant child, aloof and temperamental, but deep down, Sakamo can still see the sweetness in him. It's there, subtle and reserved for his father and Orochimaru, but still present, no matter how many derisive words he trades with an ever-cheerful guy. No one knows what to do with a tiny genius, forever dismissive of anyone not as strong as the two men who have raised him. And for the first few months, Kakashi is shunted between shonen instructors whose teams are a man short. It's a disaster all around because the other children are often twice Kakashi's age and have half his skill, and even the instructors are intimidated by him. After the third one approaches the Hokage asking desperately for Kakashi to be reassigned, Sakamo surrenders to the inevitable and mentioned it to Orochimaru over lunch. I don't know what to do, he admits, dragging a hand through his hair and resisting the urge to pull at it. If he starts, he likely won't stop until his head is as smooth as a monk's. He won't take any advice from me, and I can hardly influence how the other kids treat him, which is where most of the problem is. They're intimidated, so they lash out, and Kakashi shows them up the best way he knows how, as a shinobi. That just makes it worse, though, and it's not going to stop unless something changes. Orochimaru thoughtfully stirs his oyakodon, expression considering. I have wondered what would have happened were I assigned to a different team as a child, he says after a moment, looking up to catch Sakamo's gaze. Outwardly, he doesn't look troubled, but Sakamo can see the truth of it in his eyes. Or even a different shonen instructor. It is likely that I would have grown frustrated with being so limited, and... He doesn't finish, but Sakamo knows him well enough to understand the thought. Orochimaru would have left, would have abandoned the village and those who held him back, and even though he might have hesitated, he still would have gone in the end. Tsunade, Jiraiya, and Sarutobi were the ones who tied him down, gave him bonds he didn't want to break. Kakashi doesn't have that outside of the two of them. With a sigh, Sakamo leans forward, crossing his arms on the table and resting his chin on them wearily. He's been on back-to-back missions lately, given the rising tensions with Suna and Iwa, and it isn't helping his stress levels in the least. When he looks up again, though, Orochimaru is watching him, carefully, golden eyes sharp. You were tired, the younger man says, glancing back at his meal with disinterest and then setting his chopsticks aside. Perhaps you should sleep. 4 years ago, Orochimaru would never have even implied concern for his health, and the fact that he does so now with such ease makes Sakamo smile at him. I'm alright, he denies, pushing himself upright in his chair again. I would just wish that I had a solution. Perhaps there isn't one, Orochimaru suggests, and it makes Sakamo blink, not quite believing his ears. Seeing his expression, Orochimaru rolls his eyes faintly and stands, filling the tea kettle and placing it on the stove to heat. Kakashi is a genin, but he's far too skilled to stay as one for long. Once he's a chunin, he won't be required to have a jonin instructor and can take simple missions. Perhaps that is the best solution. We wait for the chunin exams and adjust our plans accordingly from there. He may take them. We may find a team he can work with before then. Either way, we must give him time. Orochimaru includes himself in their pack without even thinking about it now, and Sakamo beams at him, unable to help himself. The faint tip of Orochimaru's head reveals a glitter of silver, a flash of moonlight stone as his earrings catch the light. He's always wearing them. As Sid, Sakamo pressed them into his hands at the gate, and it's the closest Sakamo can come to a declaration of intent without formally filing the papers to make him a Hatake. Not that he needs to be. Orochimaru has his own clan, his own legacy, and Sakamo would never dream of taking that away from him. But proof is nice. He likes the way his clan's unofficial symbols look on Orochimaru, and it's enough to keep him content, no matter how far away Orochimaru ventures with his teammates. I think that's the best idea we're going to come up with, he agrees after a beat, when Orochimaru raises a brow at him curiously, and he realizes the silence has stretched too long. I just wish it wasn't so frustrating for all involved. The kettle whistles, and Orochimaru pours it into 2 cups and stirs in the green tea. It's a sharp, bitter, but comforting scent, and Sakamo accepts the cup Orochimaru passes him gratefully. The younger man retakes his seat, expression still considering, and then says quietly, "He idolizes you." Sakamo blinks again, caught flat-footed, and it earns him a faint, nearly sly smile from his companion. Orochimaru takes a sip of his tea, lets the words linger for another moment, and then adds, "He wants to be like you, as a shinobi and a man. I believe he currently feels so irritated with his teams because he aspires to walk the same path you did and rise quickly through the ranks. They won't allow him to, so he sees them as holding him back and thwarting his dream." That is a shock to hear, because Kakashi's default setting right now is derisive, and even his father isn't spared the sharp edge of his tongue. Ayame's influence, Sakamo acknowledges with a certain amount of bittersweet fondness and regret. His wife was quiet and calm until riled, and then she was a terrifying alien who could bring down men 3 times her size with nothing more than a few biting words. Don't look so surprised. Orochimaru is watching him again, but this time it's with amusement that's clear in his golden gaze. You are his father, after all. Don't all little boys want to be like their fathers? Did you? Sakamo asks, overcome by curiosity. He knows nothing about Orochimaru's family, beyond their deaths and the few facts he has about the clan as a whole. There's a pause, careful and considering. Orochimaru studies his tea, tracing his fingers over the faint pattern in the cup's glaze, and then inclines his head slowly. I suppose I did, he acknowledges, and then smiles faintly. My father wasn't strong, as far as chakra reserves are concerned, but he was devastating on the battlefield. He could take 3 entirely separate jutsus and twist them together into something new, and I always admired that. It was inspiring. But in the end, I am far more like my mother. Sakamo has seen Orochimaru's pictures of her, few as they are, and admits that from what he can tell, the two are indeed very similar. In looks as well, and he can't help but grin at the thought, even though he knows that Orochimaru would likely take it as a compliment rather than insult. The most men would consider it. I think they'd both be proud of you, he says, and the look Orochimaru gives him is odd. Not quite gratitude, not quite annoyance. There's a trace of surprise there, something like a flash of understanding, and then Orochimaru laughs. Just softly, barely more than a chuckle, but it's undeniably a laugh. He rises to his feet, leaning over the table, and his long hair swings forward like a heavy silken curtain around them as dry lips touch Sakamo's forehead for the briefest instant. Thank you, he murmurs, already pulling away, but Sakamo is stunned. He's never received such a gesture from Orochimaru, not in any stretch of the imagination. He looks up at the other man, who's staring down at him with something fierce in his strange eyes, something expansive and unnamed, and is this how it feels? Is this the way Orochimaru has always looked at Jiraiya? Or is it different, and Sakamo is just fooling himself, deluding himself, because he wants it to be. But is it even something that he wants? Before he can ask himself that, before he can make any sort of sense of the tangled jumble of emotions knotting up his chest, Orochimaru is stepping away, head turning towards the sound of the door opening, an annoyed voice calling, "I'm back!" "Cub," Orochimaru greets him, and gets a roll of dark gray eyes in response to the nickname. "You finished training then?" Yuri-sensei dismissed us early, Kakashi answers, sounding entirely unimpressed. He doesn't say, I think he was going to meet with the Hokage, but from the look on his face, well, it's visible of it since he's taken to constantly wearing a mask, that's clearly the assumption. Probably not an incorrect one either, given the past few weeks. It's only because Sakamoto is watching for it that he manages to catch the slanting sideways glance Kakashi gives him. Half a second of assessing his father's reaction before he returns to his conversation with Orochimaru. But Sakamoto does catch it, and he grins to himself in response, pushing out of his chair and ruffling Kakashi's hair. Well, maybe it will give the other kids time to catch up with you, he says philosophically. How about we do some training ourselves this afternoon, since you're free? It's been a while, hasn't it? A brief widening of the boy's eyes is the only tell, but the suggestion still gets a sharp, nearly enthusiastic nod. It's the most positive reaction Sakamoto has seen him show in a while now, and that saddens him. But the sorrow is beaten back by the idea of an afternoon spent solely with his son, because it really has been a while. Then I will see you this evening. I have several experiments that could do with my attention, Orochimaru says, taking a step back from them as he looks away. It's a retreat, and from the stubborn expression that flickers over Kakashi's face, he isn't any more inclined to allow it than Sakamoto. Seeing that his son is in agreement, Sakamoto ducks past the boy and wraps an arm around Orochimaru's waist, dragging him forward bodily. Do you really think we'll let you get away this easily, lovely? He asks cheerfully, and is gratified when Kakashi ever so casually tucks his fingers into Orochimaru's obi and adds his own weight to the pull. Oh no, you're coming with us. Training for the whole family. Orochimaru hisses at them in aggravation, but doesn't fight as he's steered right back into his chair. I will set Oyotsu on both of you, he threatens, but Sakamoto's had enough time to become familiar with the summons, and he knows that Oyotsu is the gentlest of those Orochimaru usually calls. It's hardly a threat at all, really. I think Fuyu could hold her off, Sakamoto counters tearfully, grinning at the thought of his oldest summons facing off with Orochimaru's white snake. The she-wolf is as tall as a horse, as cold and biting as her namesake, but the same way Orochimaru's summons are a legacy of his parents, so too are Sakamoto's, and he loves all of them. Right here, I'll just grab my gear and then we can go. With a soft huff, Orochimaru ignores him, turning his attention to Kakashi instead. Have you eaten? He demands, and the tone is testy, but the expression that accompanies it is one of barely hidden grudging amusement. Kakashi steadies him for a moment with narrowed eyes, then inclines his head, clearly reading the capitulation that the Orochimaru will never voice outright. Kurenai brought us food. His nose wrinkles slightly. More or less. If the girl's tastes are anything like those of the elder Yuhi, Sakamoto has no doubt that it was an interesting meal. He's eaten with the man on missions, and can recall a distinct fondness for octopus and wasabi, and copious amounts of liquor. Sakamoto chuckles, heading for the rack where he keeps most of his equipment. The situation is still stressful, still uncertain. There's tension rising between the nations, border skirmishes breaking out among the smaller countries and villages. There are still moments that scream of sabotage on Orochimaru's missions, if far fewer than before. Sakamoto just looked at his best friend and thought, beautiful, and it had a deeper meaning than that word has ever carried before. But this one afternoon is peaceful, a single moment shared by only 3 people in the entirety of the world, and Sakamoto knows enough of the fleeting nature of such things to value it with all his heart. 4 years on, and Orochimaru realizes he is falling in love with his best friend. I think they'd both be proud of you, Sakamoto says. They would be proud of who I have become because of you, Orochimaru thinks. He never tells him, never shows it, and he's had a practice at such things, hasn't he? Because Sakamoto has already said once that he simply doesn't like men in that way, and it eases the sting of inevitable rejection to have heard it back when his heart wasn't so invested. Besides, it's not like it was with Jiraiya. Sakamoto was present, standing next to him no matter what. And even the worst of Orochimaru's temper can't convince him to move. He is rooted in the village, tied to it in several tangible ways, and his eyes never look to the horizon as though seeking the next adventure. He is not in love with Orochimaru's first friend. Indeed, is still devoted to his deceased wife. And this infatuation is safe. Simple. Because in this case, Orochimaru's emotions are not knotted up with competition and rivalry and the strain of being a genius prodigy and a shinobi who wasn't. They are friends, and that's the extent of it, if an oversimplification. Sakamoto is his grounding, his support, but there is no undercurrent of their relationship that could so easily shift to resentment and hatred. It's easy to endure, so easy that it is more like a state of being than something to suffer. And for the most part, Orochimaru can put it out of mind, and does. There are whispers of war on the horizon, of Iwa building up resources, and Suna training more shinobi than ever before. And whenever Orochimaru sees the Hokage now, Sarutobi's face is lined and drawn, the wear of the years on him visible in a way it's never been before. There are more missions, a show of force that Konoha shouldn't have to put on, because it's the first shinobi village, and still the strongest. But Jonin and Chunin go out in droves, bringing in as much money as possible, even as assignments are quietly shuffled around, until only the top-ranked Jonin are allowed over Fire Country's borders. Tsunade and Jiraiya grow grimmer by the day, though Jiraiya hides it well, and Orochimaru watches them carefully, warily, waiting to see how the cards will fall. He's lived through one war already, and well remembers the horror of it, the way it wore them all to the bone, and further still. He half expects his teammates to flee the village again, though perhaps that is an uncharitable thought to have, and takes to spending whatever time is not taken up with a desperate sort of training around Kakashi and Sakamoto. While not untouched by the rising tension, they're more immune to it. Kakashi because for all his prowess he's still a child, and Sakamoto because he's perpetually cheerful even in the face of war. It is, Orochimaru thinks a little whimsically, settling cross-legged beneath a tree, rather like walking across a pane of thin glass. One wrong step will shatter it irreparably and send the entire world spiraling down into chaos. There's been talk of graduating academy students early. Before that happens, accelerated training, and Orochimaru isn't certain whether he approves. His team graduated early because of skill, and for all that he often mocked Jiraiya's abilities, they were not inconsequential. To push other children that much harder to fling them into a situation they aren't prepared for. That smacks of murder, and Orochimaru cannot think of such a thing without imagining Kakashi, body lifeless and mangled in some far-off field. He is not a good man, even with Sakamoto's influence and Tsunade's tempering presence, greedy and selfish and self-centered, prone to losing sight of humanity. But for all of that, Orochimaru knows that he is loyal so long as he is given reason to be. And Sakamoto and Kakashi have given him very many reasons over the years. So he's loyal to them, to Sarutobi, who has always looked on him as another son, to Konoha, where he can now walk the streets without cruel whispers following him. He's loyal. He speaks against training children solely to be used for war, ignores the way Sarutobi looks at him in surprise, the way Danzo's cold stare settles on him with something very close to disgust. Build up the foundations, he urges Sarutobi, and it sparks a thoughtful regard from wise brown eyes. Konoha is not the largest village, but it is the strongest even now. They have more jonin than most, more prodigies and geniuses and shinobi known throughout the nations, spoken of in odd tones. The White Fang, the Sannin, the clans, they are all powerful, all fearsome. Konoha is home to 2 of the 3 great dojutsus, and the remaining one is long since lost to time. They have the Kyuubi Jinchuriki, a strong Konoichi in her own right, and Namikaze Minato, already hailed as one of the best, despite his young age. Orochimaru dreads war, yes, but he doesn't fear it. It will take something very strong indeed to shake Konoha's foundations. The faint crunch of loose stones beneath Geta makes him look away from his contemplation of the horizon, and he raises a brow as Jiraiya wanders over to him, expression absently morose. The toad sage drops to the ground at his side with a heavy sigh, leaning back against the tree. Their shoulders brush, because Jiraiya has no sense of personal space, and once Orochimaru would have hated the contact just as much as he loved it. Now, though, it sparks nothing but a vague affection in him. 4 years of seeing Jiraiya love Tsunade. 4 years of seeing that there is more for him than to simply exist as an unnecessary third, and Orochimaru has moved on. It is bittersweet, perhaps, because he has loved Jiraiya since he was a child, because there is still no hope for him in his new love. But despite that, Orochimaru is comfortable in this new life. He is greedy enough to want his love returned, always, but he is also logical and practical enough to know that it is, if not in the way he would desire. Jiraiya and Sakamoto both love him, and because it is a shinobi's way to make do with what they have, Orochimaru is content to do just that. There is a long stretch of comfortable silence between them, the way there would not have been 3 years ago. The way Orochimaru had thought they lost when Jiraiya chose to stay in Ame. Their shoulders are braced together, and Orochimaru has his face turned to the warmth of the sun, eyes closed to Droid. And then Jiraiya says, "You have a mission tonight, don't you?" Orochimaru opens one eye, not quite willing to relinquish his lazy moment, even though Jiraiya looks serious. "I do," he acknowledges, even though it's supposed to be top secret, known to the Hokage alone. He's only ever kept one secret from Jiraiya, after all, and there's no one nearby to overhear. "To Ame, there are reports of an uprising against Hanzo, and Sensei seeks allies who might agree to halt Suna if forces attempt to cross the border there." Jiraiya shakes his head wearily. "The people in Ame will hate that," he mutters, rubbing his hands over his face. "They're only just beginning to put things back together after the last war, and with this one brewing." "It hasn't turned to war yet, and it may not," Orochimaru points out logically. "Perhaps something will change before it can." There's another long moment of silence, and when he shoots a curious look at his companion, Jiraiya is watching him with a small, faint smile on his face. Orochimaru raises a brow, and his teammate shakes his head, still smiling. "You're different, Orochi," he says, but his voice is warm. Before you would have wanted a war, because it would be an opportunity to fight. But I heard that what you told Sarutobi in that last meeting about the kids, and creating a foundation for the future, rather than building quickly and having it collapse around us. That's not what you would have said before." It's entirely true. He told Jiraiya to kill the Ame orphans, after all, suggested it easily and without care, because it was a logical solution. Now he thinks of Kakashi whenever someone says children, and it rather clouds his judgments. In a good way, perhaps, if he's to judge by the reactions of those around him. Orochimaru wonders suddenly because he can't quite help himself whether his suggestion was one of the reasons Jiraiya didn't simply send the children on their way. Was it a gesture of defiance against his teammate's cold heart? An attempt to show that not all Konoha shinobi were like Orochimaru? He doesn't ask, because that is one question he can live without learning the answer to. "Everyone changes," is all he says, non-committal. A pause. And then he sighs softly because he is one to give credit where it is due, and in this case, that's entirely to one man. "Sakamoto is a truly irresistible force, and I am not the immovable object I had once thought myself." Jiraiya laughs at that, light-hearted and free. "I was jealous of him," he admits easily, slinging an arm over Orochimaru's shoulders and knocking their temples together. Because he's always been a handsy sort of friend, Orochimaru endures it with a roll of his eyes that makes Jiraiya snort. "Jealous," he repeats pointedly, as though Orochimaru is the one losing the thread of the conversation. "Because I got back and you were so close to him. It was like you replaced me. And a lot of why I avoided you stemmed from that. I left you alone, and then Tsunade left too. And I know how you feel about Konoha. It was guilt, I guess. And a good portion of me being an idiot too." It is nice to hear an explanation, and Orochimaru is familiar enough with his teammate to know what this is, as close to an apology as he's ever likely to get. He inclines his head, a silent acceptance of what remains unsaid, and the grin that breaks across Jiraiya's face is 3 parts relief and 1 part gratitude. He tugs Orochimaru a little closer, squeezing tightly, and then releases him to riffle through his weapons pouch. "Oh, hey, I got you something," he says cheerfully. "Tsunade asked for some sake since I was already in Rice Country, so I figured I'd get souvenirs for you and Sensei while I was at it." Orochimaru is mildly horrified because he's had experience with what Jiraiya considers an appropriate gift. But before he can get away, there's a hand on his, pressing something soft against his fingers, and Orochimaru wearily accepts the thing and drops his gaze to study it. It's a ribbon. like girls often put in their hair, sleekly soft and a deep, quiet shade of silver. Orochimaru runs it through his fingers, testing the strength of it. He isn't entirely comforted because Jiraiya once got him a full set of silk bondage ties for his birthday, and he raises a brow at his teammate in query. Jiraiya, apparently remembering Orochimaru's less than grateful reaction to peasants past, rolls his eyes in return. You used to tie your hair back when we were practicing, back when we were kids. He huffs, crossing his arms with an offended scowl. I thought you might like the opportunity to try something new, and he trails off, then reaches forward, and with an expression of faint, amused regret, taps a finger against Orochimaru's moonstone earrings. The color matches these, doesn't it? Orochimaru is not good with people, but in an instant he understands what this is. Jiraiya is offering acceptance, showing his approval in the only way he knows how. A simple, subtle gesture because he is well aware that Orochimaru would not change his life even if Jiraiya disapproved. But it's acceptance all the same, and Orochimaru didn't even know he wanted such a thing. But he did. He takes a breath, then reaches up and slides the ribbon beneath his hair, pulling the strands back from his face in a low, loose tail and tying it carefully. Jiraiya is still watching him, and there's warmth in his eyes, clear on his face. It isn't the warmth Orochimaru looked for, desired, for so very long, but it's fondness and contentment and a complicated friendship built up over the years. They're nearly 30 now, the three of them, and all but 7 of those years have been spent together. Such closeness is hard to undermine, no matter what emotions they hide from each other. Looks good, moron, Jiraiya says gruffly, because he is, as always, allergic to sentiment. He claps Orochimaru on the shoulder, then rises to his feet and looks into the distance. If you happen to come across those 3 brats in Ame, he says, and though he's aiming for casual, he falls far short. Would you let me know how they are? Changing the world isn't an easy thing. I worry. Orochimaru inclines his head, and even though Jiraiya's eyes are turned away from him, the tension in his shoulders eases. He doesn't say thank you, and Orochimaru doesn't otherwise acknowledge the request, because that's how favors work between them, and always have. Our team leaves at sunset. Sakamoto and I will both be gone, he says, and then pauses. He adds carefully, Kakashi is a bright child, too bright for many Genin teams. If there are problems... Jiraiya's grin is easy. That request, too, goes unacknowledged beyond a casual shrug. Minato's laid up right now, he suggests. Busted up. I need to see if the Hokage will give him something to focus on beyond mooning over Kushina-chan. A gopher to find him all those dusty scrolls he likes to suffocate himself with might be just the thing. It sounds like a good enough solution to Orochimaru, who snorts softly at the image of a pint-sized, scowling Kakashi, half buried under musty old scrolls. He rises, checking the position of the sun, and brushes a few stray leaves from his robes before he turns to go. Good luck, Orochi, Jiraiya offers, quiet but heartfelt, and Orochimaru smiles faintly to himself. It's the most meaningful talk they've ever had, perhaps, likely the longest since Jiraiya's return, and he feels lighter for it. The same to you as well, Jiraiya, he returns, and his heart doesn't twinge at all as he walks away.